Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Rath Wang. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump continue to poll neck to neck where it matters the most, the 6 battleground states. We'll look at what is driving voters and how the Taiwanese American and Asian American vote could tip the election this November. Joining us today are Tsai Jung-hsiang, National Chung-Cheng University political science professor, Yin-Bing Su, National Chengchi University Department of Political Science professor. A very warm welcome to both on the show today.
Thank you.
Let's first take a look at the numbers from the CNN poll conducted by SSRS. Harris leads Trump in Wisconsin and Michigan. On the other hand, Trump is ahead in Arizona, while both are tied in Georgia, Nevada, and the key state of Pennsylvania. Professor Tsai, despite all the polls and the hype here, what is the actual situation on the ground?
I think it's hard to say because it's a very, very close race to call. Okay, if you look at this map, right? Because it takes 270 to get elected, but the thing is that it's not calculated just by popular votes. It's by electoral votes, because the U.S. has a unique electoral college system. So you look at this map: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. This is what we call key swing states. They are very, very important. They got a lot of votes. So if either the candidate wins these 3, maybe it's a guarantee they can get elected. They can get 270. So that's the whole issue here. But according to some polls, Harris is ahead. He's the top dog. She's the top dog. And Trump is trailing behind. But it's still it's very, very competitive. It's hard to say who is winning now, even now, because it's still within the margin of the error.
Aside from the polls, Alan Lichtman, the presidential historian and professor who's been mostly spot on for almost half a century, made his prediction on September 6th that Harris will win this election. Professor Su, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Professor Alan Lichtman is a very interesting figure, I would say, because he is a academician, but at the same time, many reporters and also analysts also consider his opinions as very, somehow interesting and crucial information for predicting the U.S. election outcomes. But, what he does is that he created a kind of framework to predict the electoral outcome of the U.S. presidential elections. Well, some people say that it's not very scientific, but he insisted that his framework is based on the insights from the history.
He also claims that President Biden refers to it as well.
Yes, yeah. But one weakness of his framework is that this framework, it is not for sure that when the framework will be useful depends on what kind of timing that people use that framework. So, for example, we don't know whether the framework can be useful when we apply for the framework like 6 months before the election, or 2 months, or even 2 weeks. I mean, this framework is not like, super useful when someone considers the factor of timing. Okay, so although reporters or even like some political science students love this kind of framework because it seems that the framework is useful, but at the end, sometimes the electoral outcomes might be affected by short-term events.
Let's now hear from an actual battleground state. Stephanie Chang, Michigan State Senator, she spoke about her state's winning strategy and the Taiwanese American vote.
Michigan is absolutely a critical state for the presidential election. Many of the issues that matter across the state, across the country, also very much resonating here in Michigan. Talking about reproductive freedom, talking about gun violence prevention, talking about kitchen table economic issues and making sure that families are able to make ends meet. It could be a close election across the country, but also in Michigan. But here in Michigan, knowing how important it is that we are talking about economic issues, talking about giving folks a living wage, making sure that we have an economy that really works for everyone, making things more affordable. I think it was very meaningful that Vice President Harris specifically used the words freedom and self-determination when describing her goals for the Palestinian people. And so we've got to continue to see more of that. And I think that it will make a big difference. There are differing views within the Taiwanese American community about Taiwan-China issues, for example. But and there are definitely Democrats. There are also Republicans within the Taiwanese American community. I think there's plenty that have always been Democrats, including my parents and many of their friends who are immigrants from Taiwan. I'm a proud daughter of Taiwanese American immigrants who are, pro-independence and strongly believe in Taiwan as a country that deserves its own sovereignty and its place in world organizations. As far as how people will vote in November, I think that some of that will, again, depend on what candidates say over the next 2 months. But I think that there are many people who recognize the racist and xenophobic remarks that former President Trump used during the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that had on the wave of anti-Asian hate. Taiwan-China issues actually, in a way, have actually been very bipartisan, which is a good thing, and it should be bipartisan. In Michigan, we have a Taiwan Friendship Caucus in the Michigan legislature, and it's both Democrats and Republicans, and we share the same goals in supporting, fostering a relationship between Michigan and Taiwan. Governor Whitmer actually has been to Taiwan twice, and Taiwan is the only other nation that she's actually been to more than one time. And so that relationship is there, and it's strong, and it's actually built on a bipartisan nature. Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander population is the fastest growing across the country. It's also the fastest growing in Michigan. Between 2010 and 2020, the growth of the Asian American community actually was 4 times the growth rate of all the entire state's population. It's a significant factor in terms of the success of our state. And I think in terms of looking at this election, especially knowing how close previous presidential elections have been in this state, absolutely, I think Asian Americans could be a critical piece of who wins this election.
Let's talk a bit about what Chang said on the right to freedom and self-determination, which is a key driver in many communities, including Taiwanese Americans. A large concern by the community, especially when it comes to China. We've recently seen Linda Sun, former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, charged with acting as an agent of the Chinese government. She is accused of blocking Taiwan government officials access to New York state officials and making unauthorized state proclamations for the Chinese government. Professor Tsai,
Yes.
How much do you feel the China factor is going to affect this election?
Yeah, if you look at some statements from Donald Trump, he say he has called like a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods. And Trump delivers Chinese automakers to build cars in the United States. If you build cars in Mexico and exporting to US, he's gonna charge them 200% tariffs. So Trump is very, very tough on China because it's something to do with his mega plan, okay? But this time, especially this campaign, 2024, and Trump delivers a heavier blow to China. But however, it's a trade-off because on the one hand, it can bring a lot of manufacturing jobs back to the United States. But on the other hand, it will have some collateral damages to economy because of inflation or because the increasing the cost of living. So it's a double-edged sword. Okay, that's my opinion.
Let me also throw this to Professor Su. How do you feel this Trump 2.0 China policy is in terms of resonating with voters? Do you feel with the tougher China policy, they're buying into it? Do you feel they are tired of this kind of rhetoric?
Well, Yeah, I think it is actually not very clear whether the so-called China card can work for this time because, like in general, from a more broader perspective, according to some public opinion surveys conducted by Pew Research Center, it seems that the anti-China sentiment among the U.S. Voters are pretty high in the recent years. And actually, in the Congress, it's almost becoming a kind of bipartisan consensus because we can see that there have been some pro-Taiwan bills passed in the past few years. So it seems that both candidates, of course, they are very careful about dealing with the issues about China, but I'm not sure whether Trump or Harris can rely on that issue to win more votes this time.
Speaking of key issues, let's talk about what voters think matter to them. I spoke earlier to Liz Lee, a representative of Purple State, Minnesota, also home to the Democratic vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz.
Minnesota, which is what we say a purple state. And so it is a pretty competitive state every time we have a presidential election. The governor is originally from Nebraska. That means Nebraska is in play. I always say we win elections when we make people's lives better. In Minnesota and in Michigan, we had a Democratic trifecta. They know which party is advocating for them every single day, making their lives better, making things easier for them. And so taking care of your neighbor means, again, universal school meals, right, to alleviate the high cost of living that a lot of people have seen in Minnesota and across the country and in swing states. It means cutting taxes. We had a pretty big surplus here in Minnesota, and we use that surplus to bring down property taxes for working class families in Minnesota. So I think the question is, how do we kind of translate Minnesota politics and the way we think about things with Michigan? We have shared values as states in the Midwest and states of the Great Lakes. I think we all want to make sure that our water source remains clean. Michigan has certain industries that they're stronger in, like the car industry. Under Vice President Harris, the car industry, got a big boost, right? United Auto Workers, like that union is supporting the Harris Walz ticket. Well, I think the most important thing is Tim Walz is a pro-union governor. I think that will be a consistent theme in Minnesota and in Michigan. I think for us, again, because the agriculture piece is stronger in states like Minnesota and Nebraska, I think that's Governor Walz's value add to the ticket. But really, like, winning Michigan, like, the key piece is fighting for your middle class workers, right? Your auto workers, people who work 1.5, maybe 2 jobs. Governor Walz is a very unique case. When you look at Hmong folks, we've shifted a little bit. And I think Hmong Americans and Taiwanese Americans share a very interesting common thread because, like our story, right, is that we are anti-communist, right? So Hmong folks are anti-communist against the communists in Laos and Southeast Asia. And so for a lot of older folks who fought in that war, they're Republican because, Republicans are typically anti-communist. But I'd also say, the Republican Party has changed a lot. They are embracing Russia. They are embracing communism. My district is heavily API. We have one of the largest concentrations in the entire country of API voters. He won this district. We helped him win his statewide race. And so I think Governor Walz has done a really good job connecting to API voters in Minnesota on an international level, right? Like, he's done a really good job of selling Minnesota-grown agricultural products to a lot of Asian countries like Japan and like Taiwan. We actually have a really strong trading relationship between Minnesota and Taiwan, and Governor Walz really strengthened that relationship.
Lee just spoke about how links to communism or its leaders have turned certain voters off. Professor Tsai, how much of this has affected voters in this election cycle?
Yeah, Putin has said he would back Kamala Harris in November 5th. Okay, but the Biden administration say Russia is interfering in the November vote to favor former President Donald Trump. But I think for Harris, her answer would be no, thank you. For Donald Trump, no, please, because you are supposed to support me, right? Because he didn't believe Putin is serious about this answer. And Trump said he's the toughest candidate in his approach to Moscow. Because by doing that, Russia would have never happened if he were the president attacking Ukraine. So he's so upset about Putin's endorsement to Harris, and he prays he will have the war finished and settled before he gets to the White House. So the thing is that Putin's support is a curse or is a blessing. It's hard to know.
Professor Su, what do you feel? Do you feel it's a curse or a blessing, as Professor Tsai just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think the Russia factor indeed matters in the U.S. election because it has something to do with U.S. support for Ukraine. And based on the public opinion polls, according to the latest one that is conducted by University of Maryland, 48% of the respondents said that the U.S. Should support Ukraine's defense from the Russian incursion as long as it takes. So basically, the support for the Ukraine among the U.S. citizens are pretty high. But when it comes to the evaluation about the impacts of the Ukraine war issue on the elections, actually very few American voters believe it matters. So basically, it depends on how you look at the public opinion survey results. And according to Gallup monthly poll conducted from January to July this year, on average, only 1% of the respondents said that the most important problem facing the country is the situation with Russia. And in comparison, about 2% of the respondents said that the war in the Middle East is the most important problem. So basically, I mean, if you compare these two issues, clearly the issue about Russia is actually not as important as the war in the Middle East. So all in all, we know that the U.S. citizens care about that issue, but they don't believe that that issue will determine the final outcome of the election.
Russia's been in the headlines a lot. Also in Taiwan, we've seen Taiwan President Lai Ching-te make headlines when he talked about Russia in the context of China's territorial claims, saying that if it really believes it has a territorial claim to Taiwan, China should be also taking back land from Russia. How do you feel, I'll turn to you, Professor Tsai.
Yes.
Russia plays a role in liberal democracies around the world.
Yeah, but it's a thing that Lai Ching-te say because it's a double standard for China because they want to get back Taiwan. How about Russian territories? Before it was took by the Russians, right? So Russia endorses one China principle and recognize Taiwan is part of China. So they have a no-limit partnership between China and Russia.
Which is different from the one China policy of most other countries.
Yes, it's one China principle, not one China policy. And the thing is that, a lot of American people, they view Russia as an enemy of the United States. And so is China, okay? But in Taiwan, if you try to look at some polls, 70% of Taiwanese distrust the CCP, okay? So that's the mentality of Taiwanese people and American people. So that's the case here, yeah.
Speaking of Taiwanese people, the Taiwanese electorate in the United States, Taiwanese Americans also form a large voting bloc within the Asian community in the United States. Professor Su, how do you feel this China or Russia factor plays a role in how these voters will vote?
Yeah, well, according Well, based on the issues in the past, yeah, this the issue about the China factors played a very important role for the decision of Taiwanese voters in America.
Digging more into the Taiwanese American vote, I spoke with California State Representative Evan Low. Low talks about Taiwan and its mention in the Democratic Party platform and the values that his party shares with Taiwan.
It's important to recognize, again, what the distinction is between the Democratic Party platform and the Republican Party platform, and what do we abide by? What are the principles that we stand firm on, reflecting the values of what it means to be a Democrat, and again, supporting our allies abroad. These are some key core functions to not only build, but help ensure that these policies are reflected in the democratic administration. I think the notion that funding for Ukraine will take away support from Taiwan or take the eye away from Taiwan, whereas that is, in my opinion, a false narrative, which is to say that we acknowledge and support our allies abroad. And what's most important to me, especially as the member representing Silicon Valley in California, understanding a large Taiwanese population, the commonality of semiconductors, the commonality of human rights and LGBT rights, the commonality about making sure that Taiwan beat the United States in seeing a female president. We too will have that in short order. High-speed rail is something that Taiwan has already embarked on, which is frankly old technology. California is the first state in the continental United States to embark on that of high-speed rail. So in many ways, we are also partnering in emulating many of the best practices of culture, the economic ties in Taiwan.
Professor Tsai,
Yes.
Speaking of common values, Taiwan also shares democratic values with both parties. Should Donald Trump win, or in the case of Kamala Harris, do you feel the Taiwanese government or public officials here need to adjust their strategy?
We cannot make a bet now because I don't think we need to adjust our policies because we need to speak with one voice in terms of our national interests. We will work with anyone who likes to support Taiwan and speaks for Taiwan in the United States and international fora. That's my opinion.
But going back to foreign policy, Professor Su, Harris recently released a foreign policy details in her A New Way Forward page. She talked about Xi Jinping and used the China threat even before mention of Russia or Ukraine. How will this resonate with voters, you feel?
Well, I think the approval rate or the support rate for Harris stays like pretty stable. So basically, in terms of the campaign strategy, she needs to find a way to attract more attention from the voters. So probably that's one of the strategy that she did. So let's see, whether this kind of a change or the new sort of attraction works in the next few days, because she just announced that, right? And we also cannot ignore that the presidential debates will be held, right? So let's see whether this kind of new issue in the sense that she just announced might play the role in the debate.
You talked about earlier as well, Professor Su, about how short-term issues also affect the election, but there's also been numbers coming out that did not go with what election forecasters have said. And bump in conventions, there wasn't a bump with Donald Trump, there wasn't a bump with Kamala Harris. Why is this?
Yeah, well, because this kind of debate is events that really requires the candidates to pay close attention to what's going on, on sites, right? So sometimes the mass media will, sort of not exaggerate, but sometimes it can distort some kind of message or even some slip words, right? Like some candidate said. So basically, this kind of short-term events might actually play a role to shape the public opinion.
Given that China is a central part of both the campaigns, what do you feel is in it for Taiwan? I'll go to you, Professor Tsai.
Okay, because Taiwan is a very, very important and it can reach a bipartisan consensus in the United States, no matter it's Democrat Party or Republican Party, because including the administration and the Congress. So they are not gonna give up Taiwan. That's my concern, yeah.
But I wanted to go back to one point that we talked about earlier in the show with the arrest of what was accused to be an aide of China agents with Linda's son, and we've also seen Trump's controversial comments on Taiwan. How does this play into the bigger picture?
Yeah, because we had to look at what he has to do, and in the future, what he will do something about Taiwan, not about what his words, because sometimes actions speak louder than words. So we cannot just, okay, because this is what he say. He likes to say some exaggerating words, sentences. Sometimes it can give you a big shock, right? But it doesn't mean the whole party will change the policy, especially to Taiwan or to China. Yes.
Professor Su, how do you see Linda's son? Because this was not on the Republican side, but rather on the Democratic side. Do you feel there are concerns about infiltration in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, well, that event is definitely a very important event, and but I'm not sure whether this event will affect the electoral dynamics in the current electoral campaign. But in general, well, that news or event will definitely attract a lot of attention from the public. That at least for some states, the issue of national security should be paid more attention to.
Thank you very much for both of your insights today.
Okay, thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show. Stay safe, and see you next time.